Welcome back to Shout on TV Taboo Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit FX and BBC show Taboo. I am one of your co-hosts, Roger Roper, and alongside me, I've got my buddy, Gene Lyons.
Just shouting at the river.
And this is our fan email episode where we look back on this week's episode of Taboo and provide our feedback on the top listener emails for the week in a little segment we now call the River Rants. We still have no title for this week's episode.
Yeah, it was really strange. Big D asked us, while I was doing the write-up for episode 2 to, as soon as I figured out the title to let him know. And episode 1, it was shovels and keys?
Yeah.
And then episode 2 is just episode 2. So I guess, now we're just going to call them by number, which honestly is easier to remember. So that's cool. Doesn't give us a lot of help on for search engines, but, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who never tuned into one of our fan email episodes, here's the format. Here's what we're going to do. So this was very popular for when we did the Westworld podcast. And essentially what we do is we ask our listeners to write into us. Our email address is hosts@shoutontv. And there's a lot of great fan engagement that comes as a result of it. And especially in a show like this, we were talking about it before the season even started. Like you and I both admitted we're going to need help for this. Westworld, I felt like there was a lot of collaboration everywhere. But for a show like Taboo, it's a little bit more niche. And we definitely need some insight because it's a heavy-handed story.
Right, Raj. And when we started this up, we kind of said, if we got the necessary amount of emails, we would end up doing this. And the listeners really came through. We've had some excellent ones. We ran some of them on on our normal deep dive, which we release every Tuesday. But this one, immediately after the show airs on FX, the emails started showing up, and we realized it's time that we bust out a second episode a week, which we're happy to do. So you keep providing those emails, and hopefully we can work together and crack this case.
Absolutely. So we will release our River Rants every Friday. We're recording on a Thursday evening in Arizona, and we'll release on Friday. So you have up until about 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays every week to get your emails in, and that way we can read them on air. You can also join the conversation on our website on River Rants, and that's where you see all the emails that we discussed today on the podcast. They'll be up there. So without any further delay, Gene, let's dive into the first email. It comes from Gary K. Gary K writes, "Hello guys, I have followed you from Westworld over to the show, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the season of Taboo with you. My one comment from last week. One of you mentioned the eye play between the clerk scribe at the table and Jay Delaney. Thinking how Delaney told us he observed the methods of Strange's empire, implying that he has served under Strange's command, it would seem logical that Strange would surround himself with loyal personages. Therefore, the clerk has risen up through the ranks to this menial position, leading to the idea that Delaney and the clerk have some sort of previous relationship while in the East India Cadet School or service. Perhaps this is the chap feeding Delaney some of his information. Finally, I know you guys were taking suggestions for which show to do next after Westworld. If you are thinking to continue your podcast after Taboo, please let me suggest the up-and-coming show American Gods featuring the star of Deadwood, Ian McShane. I am currently listening to the audiobook when not listening to my podcast list, and it is fantastic. I'm really looking forward to the show, and he put a link there to American Gods, and that comes from Gary K. So first things first, the scribe and that relationship with Delaney.
Yeah, so the scribe we're talking about is Godfrey. He's the guy in the meetings who's writing down everything that's said, except for when people raise their hands, in which case he's not writing that part down. In episode 1, we see a definite eye connection between James Keziah Delaney and Godfrey. And then in episode 2, Godfrey is belittled by Stuart Strange, and in that case, I feel like he's even playing dumb. He knows a lot more than he lets on. He kind of has that exterior of being sort of a non-personality. He wants you to forget he's in the room. But it would make sense that, the Godfrey and James have some sort of connection. I don't know what that is. And it's plausible to think that they came up together, although I feel like Strange would have a little more camaraderie or a little more identification or know a guy a little bit better if he had served under him. Just like Strange says he doesn't really know James Keziah Delaney. I don't buy that he doesn't remember him. I also think that if he did know Godfrey a little bit better, he would be more wary of him.
So let me ask you this, and again, it may not mean anything because I know IMDb can be written by whomever. It's the Wikipedia of movie resources. But if you click on the character of Godfrey on IMDb, another character's name pops up, Wilton. That doesn't mean anything to me, but it could be that maybe he's a spy. Maybe there's more, like you said, there's a deeper relationship here that Gary is suggesting, and that you suggested along with Big D in the previous episode.
Well, what's interesting, Gary brings up a great point, is that in all of this, we've seen in episode 2, in episode 1, we were kind of left wondering how James knows as much as he does. In episode 2, we start seeing some of his tools of detective work. One of them appears to be some sort of divination and ritual where he can kind of sense spirits or communicate with spirits. He also has his own, methods of physically inspecting things, digging around, rooting around, digging in the floorboards of the ship and all that, or discovering shackles, discovering, the playbill in the drawer. But in addition to all that, he's shown that he relies on a network of people. He's got Atticus at his disposal, and also he's now working with Helga and attempting to persuade her to kind of be on his side. So he is he's his own FBI of sorts. He's not afraid to use whatever means at his disposal, showing that he's not just spiritually connected, not just physically imposing, but also very smart.
Gary, thank you so much for the email. And, touching on the American Gods, if you didn't know already, we did announce in December that we are going to be doing and covering American Gods right after Taboo. I believe the show launches in March or April, if I'm not mistaken. But you can actually subscribe on iTunes. We put a placeholder episode in where we kind of talking about our experience with American Gods. So we're looking forward to it as much as you are, Gary. So be sure to do that. Thank you so much for writing in. The next River Rant comes from Jez Bell, one of our favorite listeners from Westworld, has also followed us over here to Taboo. She writes in, "Hi guys, I enjoyed this week's episode much more than last week's. I know that it was quite harsh, but I have kept an open mind and have been swayed to the dark side. The dialogue is heavy-handed in my opinion. It's trying to be poetic, but it all sounds too poncy." And I assume this is some sort of English slang because Jez Bell's from London. So I'm not sure what poncy means. Yet there may be some hidden depths that have yet to be revealed. When I saw Stephen Graham, I was transported, Jason Statham joke, back to the days of like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Layer Cake, and Snatch. Hardy is also part of that same crew. Ritchie and Vaughn made these gangster movies where everything is connected and revealed ultimately through non-chronological storytelling. The connections are all there, but the way the story unfolds is so subtle. I feel like Hardy is trying to do something similar here with Taboo. You can see that in the Fight Club-esque ghostly apparitions and some dialogue that I think we aren't meant to understand until the final episodes. The difference is that Ritchie and Vaughn created movies that are funny, really funny. Taboo has no humor whatsoever. And again, she sends love from London, Jez. What do you think about this email, Gene?
First of all, poncy. That is basically like effeminate, male and effeminate. So it's kind of flowery. Also, if somebody calls you a ponsto, it's kind of like a mooch, like that you bum things off people a lot, or kind of parasitic. So love that term. I haven't heard it since I don't know, like Chicago 2007 or something like that. So well played, Jez. It's interesting because as an American watching this, I've felt it is quite poetic and reminds me a lot of works by Bronte, by Lovecraft, by Poe. It gets me back to a lot of my literary roots that I really appreciate. But at the same time, it is interesting to know that I am a admitted Anglophile, and so to me, everything English seems really cool. And so maybe, it's nice to hear an opinion from across the pond, saying that, no, this is actually some sort of a failed attempt or not as good as, things in the vein of Lock, Stock, and Snatch, both of which I was a huge fan.
I don't know about you, but I wouldn't compare Lock, Stock, and Smoking Barrels and Snatch to what they're trying to do here with Taboo. I feel like Taboo more like looks like one of his own endeavors, Peaky Blinders, which I tried to watch and I could not get into. The thing that is, I guess, concerning for me, and again, I'm not trying to bash the show or say that I don't like it, but it's difficult as an American to follow the entire story without subtitles. Like the words are poetic, yes, but you have to read them.
Yeah, and in your defense, Raj, Tom Hardy has his own accent. He does his own weird thing. It's a combination of kind of grunts and mutterings and whatever. But I think that, again, it's, when I watch a show and a scene takes place at night and I can see everything a little too well, I kind of feel like that's how it is a lot of time with language, where the show cleans the language up so much so I can understand it as a viewer. And I kind of like the realism of having to wonder what somebody said. It's part of acting. And I would hate for anybody to strip themselves of a character feature just to placate me as a viewer. One thing, going back to Stephen Graham, he looks as Atticus. When I saw Atticus, I thought Atticus was pretty big, and in fact, he's actually not that tall. And going back and watching it again, Atticus is significantly shorter, which Stephen Graham he's a pretty short guy. He's significantly shorter than other people in the scene, but much like Tom Hardy, his getup, the head tattoo, it makes him look bigger than he really is.
Yeah, it's definitely an imposing force. What do you think about this idea that Tom Hardy is unfolding the story in multiple time frames or timelines? Which is the one we don't want to use? We don't want to use timelines. We want to use time frames. Are we doing a la Westworld unreliable narrator here?
No, I don't think it's quite that. I think what Jez was saying is that it unfolds subtly, like when they're putting pieces together in a non-chronological story, in the sense being that you're going to get bits and pieces as they go, but it won't all come together until the end. Rather, that evidence is withheld selectively so you are not allowed to form a complete picture until the absolute end of it.
Got it. Perfect. Jez, thank you so much for writing in. We appreciate it. The next River Rant email comes in from Joe. He writes, "Hello, guys. This is Joe from Utica, New York. Watching the first 2 episodes, I've got one thought that I hope the show will reveal soon in the series run. There's a running point in the show that is in both episode 1 and episode 2. They might not be associated, but it has me thinking. The madam in episode 1 recalls that she remembers James and the stories about him. In that conversation, she says, 'If I send a girl with you, she won't come back,' to which he responds, 'You're right.' Then in episode 2, his sister indicates, other than the possible incest, that there may be more things before he went away that should stay buried. As I say, I hope the answers may come soon. Might be reaching on this. Either way, I do enjoy the podcast. Keep up the good work, gentlemen." So is he and this is Joe from Utica. So is Joe from Utica suggesting that maybe this guy, James Delaney, is a homicidal killer who would serial murder women and then bury them?
I mean, you got some stuff buried there, Raj. I mean, that seems like you took that ball and ran with it. But yeah. I do think that we will discover that James Delaney is much darker than we imagine. I hope it goes that way. Now, you could see that in different ways, right? She says, "I send a girl with you, she won't come back." And James could be playing on that in saying that he would, free her from prostitution or somehow, be, a force to keep her away from Helga and therefore be a positive influence. But I don't want him to be a knight in shining armor. I really hope that's not the case. I think that he's got enough good qualities. If you allow me to draw a parallel to the military, right? When we've got soldiers that we heroicize and who are the champions of our nation, they've done some pretty horrible things, right? Sometimes in order to exact revenge or to meet force with force or to take out some great evil like the East India, you need to be a great evil yourself, Make no bones about it. The men and women serving in our military in a combat capacity, they're killers. They're state-sanctioned murderers. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But to say that they are people with clear past, that's not the case either. So I think that James is perfectly willing to do what it takes to achieve his goals. And that makes him not necessarily a great person.
So do you think that the Delaney company had any prior engagements with slavery? And that's maybe what the sister is talking about. The fact that he knowingly engaged in some side business deals with the slave trade. And then possibly as a result of being involved in it, maybe he gets stranded or he loses his ship and then has to live among them and then changes his ways and his attitudes towards slavery. Is that a possibility?
Right. We have no picture of James as he was before he returned from Africa. So Africa could have been a complete metamorphosis for him. We have no idea who he was as a person other than a few clues. We know that he had some sort of a sickness that he felt that he needed to be cured of. Or we also know that he had a love for Zilpha. Other than that, we don't know a whole lot. He has a loyalty to his father, but you really don't know much else. And we don't know much about Horace and what his dealings were.
Well, and again, this is pure speculation, but based upon what we know so far, go with me on a little bit of a theory here. Let me see if you think that the pieces kind of fit together. And again, I could be wildly off. But so far what we know is that James Delaney did serve under Sir Stuart Strange. We do know that. We do know that also that he did bad things and is not proud, most likely, of the things that he did in the East India Company. He also knows that the East India Company has some hidden secrets, some things that they leave off the dossiers, the ones that they don't want the public to know. In episode 2, we learned the ship that the Spanish had taken over and then he just bought, it was previously used by the East India Company for the slave trade. So maybe Stuart Strange had his hands in this business and was using a young James Delaney. Maybe young James Delaney was part of that whole side business that was going on and has come back to basically say, listen, like, all of that was wrong. I'm no longer the man that I was. You didn't even know who I was when I was doing your dirty deeds. I'm here to correct the wrongs of what I did and what you did.
It's possible. However, a couple counterpoints. One is that the East India, for the most part, actually had very lofty ambitions and ethics at that level, at that top level. It's when it filtered down through the actual operations where things got a little bit nasty. So often the East India actually, this is kind of in the defense of the East India, was the fact that they did not have any way. You got to remember, with communications and how big the world was relative to how small their knowledge of what was going on was, it was very hard to manage all that. So it would be strange if, no pun intended, if it was being controlled from the top like that. Also, an interesting point is, if that were the case, then there's a possibility, because this ship, we know historically, has been to Nootka Sound. His connection with it, if he did serve aboard that ship, means that he could have been there. Although it would have been in Nootka Sound like late 1700s, like we're talking 1788, 1790. So James would have been a boy at best. So that'd be a little strange.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what people did. I mean, he went into the service. I think didn't you mention that young men at the age of like 11 or 12 would join the company as part of their ranks?
Sure, but he would have been like 2 or 3 years old.
Oh, got it.
assuming that he's in his 20s now.
Well, I don't think he's in his 20s. We don't know his age. I would say he's probably in his late 30s.
So if he was in his late 30s, that means that he would have been born in the 1780s. Mm-hmm. So still, he would have been like, at best, like maybe 8 to 10 years old. So maybe with his father involved. I don't know.
I'll have to go back and watch episode 1 or listen. If you're a fan and you're listening to this and you know the time frame, please send it. Please write us an email. We're hosts at Shat on TV. I could have sworn they did something that gave us some sort of element of timeline.
The time frame of what?
Of when he served, those years that he served.
Well, yeah. I mean, if he went to the academy would have been from when he was roughly like 16 to 18 years old, in which case, that would place it about 20 years prior to this. So you're looking at like late 1790s. Okay. So that would have been significantly after at least the initiation of the involvement of, because you got to remember that, again, the ship, the Feliz Aventurero, it started out in basically Chinese territory and then like moved into Nootka under false banners so that the EIC wouldn't tax it, right? So it'd be free of the EIC monopoly. So again, I do not fault the show for not going that in depth, but if they connected it to the actual history of the ship, that's super cool.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe from Utica, for writing in. The next River Rant comes in from, I'm going to mispronounce this. Is it Clementina?
Clementina?
Clementina. Anyway, she writes in, hello, tinfoil top hat gentlemen, greetings from Poland. Which, by the way, Clementina, beautiful name. First, I want to thank you for hooking me on Westworld. After finding and thoroughly enjoying your first Taboo podcast, I discovered that you're waiting for the American Gods as impatiently as I am, so I thought I should probably check out that other thing too, catching up now. What I still keep wondering about Taboo is, are there really supernatural elements in this show's world, or are they just playing with people's minds? Do we see apparitions because they are actually there, or should we assume that they're imagined, caused by insanity, traumatic experiences, or beliefs? I'm not really sure which I'd prefer, and this inability to determine the convention doesn't diminish my watching pleasure in the least, but until I'm sure, I'm spending way too much time devising realistic explanations for all the seemingly supernatural occurrences. Edgar Allan Poe had his own analytically reasoning detective, so I feel it's only appropriate. To me, visions, flashbacks look like James had experienced some sort of native rituals, American or African, which combined with intense guilt for whatever evil weighs on his conscience could haunt him. Post-EIC stress disorder, if you will. I'm inclined to treat his talk about death and the dead rather figuratively, but he does appear to practice some form of religion. Or perhaps ripping out jugulars and strange rites are no voodoo, but a deliberate choice to uphold his savage reputation for whatever plan he has in store. Anyway, I blame you and your delightful podcast for encouraging my overactive imagination, so thanks, and until next week, best regards, Clementina.
So, yes, so Clementina, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. She's onto something here that's really huge. So Poe had a detective character named Dupin, and Dupin was actually predates the term detective, but he used like a combination of imagination and reasoning to solve cases, essentially, like the Purloined Letter and other stories like that. So this is a really excellent, reference in the point that, okay, again, Poe invented this. We're talking the late 1800s. And so this would even predate that. So to put you in a historical context, James Delaney could be a detective before they even knew what the hell a detective was. So there's no term for what he is. And this is before detective work had been invented. So he could be before our eyes inventing what it is to be a detective. With regards to the supernatural and whether these are naturally, explained occurrences or not, I think that this could go two ways. One way is a Scooby-Doo way where there's actually perfectly normal stuff going on, but people are being spooked or spooking themselves. But another way entirely has to do with whether or not the ghosts can provide information that no one would otherwise know. That is the key to knowing whether they're imagined or not. For example, if Winter is a ghost, if Winter is a spirit, and providing James with information that he could not get elsewhere, and that's his key to knowing a bunch of stuff, like if it's one of his things in his arsenal, then clearly they're not just imagined, because you can only imagine the things that your mind is already aware of.
Yeah, so I just had to do a quick Google search on you right there, and you're right. Scotland Yard had not been established yet. Scotland Yard was not founded or was not passed by parliamentary until 1829. So if we equate Scotland Yard with detective work, I think we're on to something. I think you're right there. But I don't know much about Edgar Allan Poe. Again, I have to lean on your expertise in that realm. In terms of supernaturalistic endeavors that is happening here, we questioned one of the characters that appeared in episode 2, whether or not they were real, and that character was Winter. And the reason for that is she suddenly appears, she offers him information that seems suspect, and then when he goes and does the deed, he burns down the ship, comes back, he's surprised that she's no longer there. There's no it seems if he's a detective, there would be evidence that she left, but she's just gone. And then it seemed in the conversation that he had with Helga was discounting the fact that she even had a daughter. So is Winter one of the ghostly apparitions? She's also lit differently. She has different kind of makeup. We've seen flashbacks of similar characters in a similar light. Is he seeing things like Winter, or are just apparitions appearing in the background to just kind of tease us with that idea that he can see the characters? I don't think it's vampires, is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But is he seeing ghosts, and are those ghosts talking to him? Because one of them did in the morgue in episode 1. And is Winter a similar type ghost?
Yeah, well, there's the idea that James there's been some sort of a traumatic experience. I know, Rod, you're a huge fan of the OA.
Oh,
but there is a possibility here that James has undergone either some ritual or some sort of an incredible experience, maybe a near-death experience that has exposed him to certain things. He may be walking the line there. It's yet to be seen, but it is one of the very interesting questions of the show. Are these ghosts real or not? And I'm so glad that, Raj, that you even pointed out that there were ghosts in the backgrounds of the scenes, because I completely missed that. I was credited with it on Twitter. Not the case. I did not even notice those ghosts until later, but it was so cool to see them.
So are you going to be upset if we see James Delaney do a haka maneuver with 3 other people at the end of the season? I will be pissed if they pull out some of those yoga maneuvers.
Hey, man, I want to do all 5 movements with them.
Jesus. That's an OA reference. Is this a supernatural show? Yes or no?
Define a supernatural show.
Okay. Is it like The Sixth Sense? Is James a unreliable narrator, and the people that he's talking to are actually ghosts?
I think you might have just contradicted yourself, though. He could be a perfectly reliable narrator, and those are actually ghosts. I think he's an unreliable narrator if they're not ghosts. If they're imagined, then that would make it a little.
Well,
strange.
I guess Winter. If we're to suspect that Winter's a real character, and then it turns out she's dead, right? The Sixth Sense maneuver. That's an unreliable narrator, correct?
No. And
No?
the reason why, and the reason why is that he may be so used to this that he would treat a ghost the same as a person. Like he lacks the ability to even tell the difference.
Okay. My money, personally, is on that this guy is just a broken individual. He's a savage, and he definitely has some sort of post-traumatic disorder where he sees these type of things, and it's things that have happened in his recent past, in the last 10 years since he's been away. I don't think that this is a supernatural show. I don't think that he's really talking to ghosts. I think he's just seen the ghost of his past, and that's what it's supposed to symbolize.
And that would make for a fascinating show, Raj, if in fact he hallucinates, he is scarred by these experiences, and that actually is what drives him and what powers him. We've never seen a character like that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, he is biting necks. That's like a total fight move, though, right? Something he picked up when he went native.
Yeah, I've never gone native, but I've been in a lot of fights and never bit through anybody's neck.
Do you think he believes that if he takes the flesh out of another man, he regenerates? And is this something that his father believed in? Because I've seen other people talk about that concept.
There's two explanations, I think, for the bite. The bite clearly was not to incapacitate or kill his attacker. I think that was taken care of already. The bite could be one of two things. One is that he does believe that somehow it's going to help him recover from this stab wound to his stomach. Two could be that he wants word to get out around London that he bit through a guy's neck. He wants to keep up that image of a savage that, this guy he's an animal. Do not fuck with him. He will bite through your neck. Like, he is crazy.
Thank you so much for writing in. The next River Rant email comes from Jason B. Jason B. writes in, hey guys, I think we are being led to believe that, or at least the writers are hoping we will assume the diamonds are from Africa. I think maybe they are from Utica Sound. Although I know nothing about diamond mines and whether or not they can be found along small strips of coastlines. Thanks for the podcast. You guys make a tedious 8-hour slog much more bearable. That comes from Jason. So basically the question is, are the diamonds from Africa or are they from Utica Sound? And Utica Sound is, a hidden gem. Get it? Gem of a gold mine? Aha.
To my knowledge, there's no diamond mines in Utica Sound or anywhere in Vancouver or Washington State. I think if it were, then they wouldn't consider Utica Sound a rock that was worth very little. Again, if we're going Occam's razor here, the guy spent time in Africa. He's got diamonds. It's reasonable to believe that those diamonds are from Africa.
The only active diamond mine in the United States is in Arkansas. In terms of Canada, there are diamond mines in the northern reaches and the northern provinces, but it's nowhere near Utica Sound. So for my money would be that the diamond mines would most likely come from Africa. My question to you is, were diamonds that valuable back in the 1800s? Because from my understanding, De Beers, which is the largest producer, basically has a monopoly on diamond mines across the world, they're the ones who artificially inflate the price of diamonds. And the whole idea of a diamond engagement ring was just a marketing ploy that they did back in like the early 1930s or 1940s. So, I mean, did diamonds still hold the same kind of weight that they did back then?
Yeah, I think that this was an era when people were looking to express their affluence, and there were a few ways to do it. Like, you got to remember, this is pre-industrial revolution. This is, before technology. There wasn't as many commercial items. So the things that became really valuable were the things that were just hard to get. And things that are hard to get were spices. Again, I'm going to reference it one more time. The Honorable Company, the book I'm reading for this podcast. Spices served an interesting purpose because they were easily transported, hard to get, and when you use them, people could smell them, and so it was sort of a symbol of your affluence, even if the spice wasn't even particularly appetizing. So with diamonds, they kind of came in vogue in the 1800s, but you're absolutely right. They didn't catch fire really until the late 1800s, where the ball started rolling. But in this sense, anything that you could get that was novel and hard to get, the rich wanted it.
Some of the history, the world's love of diamonds actually had its start in India. In the 1700s, as India's diamond suppliers began to decline, Brazil actually emerged as an important source. Diamonds were discovered there in the pans of gold miners as they sifted through local rivers. And Brazil actually dominated the diamond market for more than 150 years. The 1800s, as you mentioned, brought increasing affluence to Western Europe and the United States, and explorers unearthed the first great South African diamond deposits in the late 1800s, just as the diamond demand broadened. So, yeah, I mean, it's perfectly, I guess, acceptable between the 1700s and 1800s to assume that diamonds still had some sort of valuable. Most likely, they came through the slave trade with Brazil, if we're trying to stay historically accurate. Thanks so much for writing in. Next River Rant comes from Gillian. Gillian writes, look, guys, I love to look at Tom Hardy, especially since he's always covered in just the right amount of glistening sexy sweat, but this show puts me to sleep. Bravo on the attempt to make the East India Trading Company even more lively than it was, but it seems like this is more of a backstory on how Bane came to be Bane than it does to tell the story of a time in England controlled by the East India Trading Company and acted like mobsters in the way that they went about business. I know we shouldn't be comparing apples to oranges, but let's also not act like this show is anywhere near as entertaining, mind-warping, or interesting as Westworld. I know Big D and Gene, you guys are really trying to make it sound way better than it is, and I thank you for that. But honestly, your podcast is the best thing about this show because at least I can understand what you guys are saying rather than the 60 minutes of grunting and mumbling. This show would have hit it out of the park if it somehow came to a conclusion and instantly you see James Delaney falling into the pit of despair, finding Ra's al Ghul's daughter and trying to take over Gotham. That show would be worth sitting through this history lesson for. I can't be alone in thinking that this would be so much better as Bane's backstory, right? Raj? Anyone? And that comes from Gillian. Listen, a backstory on Bane through Ra's al Ghul I think would be fun. But yeah, I mean, Tom Hardy, we talked about this. Tom Hardy is kind of acting like Bane from the Batman series.
Oh, I don't think so at all. He had an intense self-love that was a little out of this world. Bane was very fond of himself, very arrogant, and I don't see James. I don't think James Delaney thinks of himself at all. He's a mission on legs, basically. Like he has no. It's my mom. He's a mission on legs. What troubles me, Gillian, about this is that I do believe that this show is more entertaining and interesting than Westworld. I'll go out and say it. Westworld felt like it was a show written for juveniles. This feels like a show written for adults. And as far as the East India being interesting, I mean, the dialogue that goes on in Westworld, we could sustain it maybe between two characters and keep it interesting. You involve a third character in a scene, and things just kind of went loopy. In this one, in Taboo, you can have multiple characters, each with interesting and subtle nuances, interacting with each other, and it's interesting all around, I think, again. And as far as the East India being entertaining, the East India is incredibly entertaining. Like, what better? I mean, we were excited about it before the show even started. But the rich history of it, the bizarre goings-on, the fact that, to quote Men in Blazers, we were an empire once, like that's all a fascinating show to me. I think you're doing it a great disservice by saying that the best it could be is just some sort of a prequel to Gotham.
I want everyone to subscribe to our Instagram at ShadOnTV because I'm going to post a picture of Gene's face blurred out by the lines, Westworld was written for juveniles. Listen, I love this email. I thought it was hilarious. It's my nomination for email of the week. Gillian, we're happy that you're powering through these episodes just to hear Gene and I and Big D talk. We do appreciate it. But I'm a weird guy. I like history just like you. I would like to see a little bit more historical context of the East India Company. I enjoyed seeing the Prince Regent who takes over and becomes George IV because his father goes insane and is declared insane in 1811. Those kind of historical things are interesting to me. And it's getting better, so maybe it will. Perhaps they focus a little bit too much on the Tom Hardy being Tom Hardy versus a cool historical show with some great fiction thrown in.
Now, it could be because nobody's watching this show, but I like the fact that, when we were watching Westworld, theories were flying in left and right about the most meaningless characters with the most ridiculous plot lines possible, instead of focusing on the real deep questions. I think in Taboo, what's refreshing is that there are two central questions, essentially. Who killed Horus and why, basically. And those two questions, it gives us a framework where they've set up the puzzle. They want us to solve it. Now, in Westworld, we could say, okay, the puzzle was the maze. But was the puzzle the maze? Or was the puzzle, is Dolores sentient or not? Or was the puzzle who is the man in black? Or was the puzzle is Bernard really Arnold? There were so many questions that you couldn't focus on any central thing. The story got so big that they had to wrap it up quickly, in episode 10. I feel like this story is being allowed to play out. They're giving us plenty of time to digest, but all the pieces seem relevant to the central question, which is, why is Horace dead, and how will James, exact his revenge?
I would throw in a third question. What's the taboo? Are we going to solve the taboo?
Ooh. Straighten your skirt, Raj. You'll find out.
Thanks so much for writing in, Gillian. Our last River Rant of the week comes from Marcus, Coach Marcus. He writes in, fellas, thanks for reading my email on the last podcast. I was uber hyped to hear my name called as the first email. I appreciate it. Down to business. And he put down 4 bullet points here. Number 1. One of my previous questions was answered in episode 2. We know now that James and Zilpha did, in fact, have a sexual relationship. How long and the results of it have yet to be revealed. Could the boy be the result of the relationship? Let's start there. Let's answer each one as they come. Did we find out that they had a sexual relationship?
First of all, this is Coach Marcus?
This is Coach Marcus.
Welcome back, Coach Marcus.
So here's a little fun story about Coach Marcus. Coach Marcus actually played NFL football for the Philadelphia Eagles. Pretty badass. That's pretty awesome. Badass. Yeah.
And he wasn't even a long snapper.
No, he was not a long snapper. No. We have one of our other good friends is a long snapper for the Washington Redskins.
To answer your question, Raj, I'm not convinced yet, but it seems to definitely be going that way. I'm one of those guys until I see D in V, I'm not buying it, but or any variation of that. If we get some commando style pegging, that's fine too. But basically, I'm not convinced yet. The boy being a result of a relationship, I think that a lot of people picked up on that possibility. And I think that it's, again, I'm not willing to declare it, but it is an interesting take and would make sense.
Does it seem creepier, the relationship that he has with Zilpha, than it does with the Lannisters in Game of Thrones? I know a lot of, what? It's funny because people are calling this show Bane of Thrones, so it kind of goes with the sexual tension between the sister and the fact that he's walking around like Bane. So, I find for some reason, even though they're half sister, half brother, I find their relationship strangely, there's no sexiness to it. It's completely weird. I believed, not that I find the Lannister, Jamie, and help me out here,
Cersei,
not that I find their relationship incredibly sexy by any means, but it's believable. You can see that there's a genuine love there. With this one, it seems as if one of them didn't want it.
I don't think necessarily that one of them didn't want it, but the idea is that it's all how you treat it, right? And I agree that with the Lannisters, that Cersei will stop at nothing to protect her family, and Jamie will stop at nothing for Cersei. She is everything to him. And so in that sense, it's also how they carry it though, where Cersei is a proud, powerful, devastating woman, and Jamie is a clever, bold, brave man. And so the two of them, they are at their best, and together they're even better. In this case, you've got basically two broken characters. You've got a woman who cowers, essentially before her husband, who conspires against her own family, apparently, and who is not brave enough to openly be on the side of her brother, her incestual lover. At the same time, you have a man in James who is abandoned, apparently, the person that he loves, if he doesn't in fact love her, who is strange, who will not out and out stand proudly in love with her. And so it's a completely different situation. I agree with you. This is infinitely more creepy than the Lannisters.
Do you just want them to admit that they did it versus a 8-episode arc of did they, didn't they? Like a Ross and Rachel situation here?
Like I said, I'd rather have as few questions as possible and really kind of weigh the evidence, put the clues together, and solve one or two big questions, not be distracted by additional ones. So yeah, I'd like it to be out in the open and just get it over with, as I would like excess characters or people who are not involved to be sort of eliminated from the storyline as we progress toward the end, so that we can really get a clear picture of, by a process of deduction of what exactly went on.
Yeah, exactly. Do you feel like the little boy is the result of their incestuous relationship?
My gut says no.
There's no contest here, no winners or losers here. But I think that there's something there, and it's a hidden secret in the family. Like, I think the father had to look after it, maybe had to send it away for fear of retribution against. So he took it under his wing and then had him adopted by and looked after by a caretaker. So that's my thoughts. But again, there's a lot. I want answers, not more questions, right? The second point that Marcus writes in his email: is it me, or did it seem that as soon as James discovers the theater program and sees Lorna Bowe's name circled, he had a look of realization like, I hope you didn't do what I think you did. Clearly, she is a fake, but it seemed to me like he expected her. I think James will use her as a pawn to get to the East India Trading Company. Your thoughts on his reaction when he first saw that playbill?
I thought that he was reacting more to the fact that her character in The Painted Savage was the Indian princess, and how if in fact his mother was a native woman who was purchased by his father, how it was sort of like, Jesus, are you serious? Like, that sort of the dawning of like, oh, the old man's got a pattern here, or that he's like trying to recapture something, or even just the pain of knowing that that is a term that could be applied to your own mother who was bought. That is a little strange. Now, interestingly, I like what he says here about James, using Lorna Bowe as a pawn to get to the East India. What we didn't discuss in the last deep dive that came out Tuesday was the fact that it is possible, though unlikely, that James expects all of this, that this is part of the plan, that he even maybe contacted Lorna and said, okay, look, you're a way that I can get at this where they think I lost, but in fact, I can get it through you. So come work with me.
Yeah, but wouldn't he just be hedging his bets at this point? Because he's already got the upper hand when it comes to the will situation, right? She's supposedly thrown a wrench into all of that. And from what I understand, there is in fact proof that he did marry. It's an Irish marriage certificate. Whether or not they accept that in England or not as a contract is yet to be seen. I guess the question that I have with this Lorna Bowe character and the relationship that she has with Horace is, wouldn't Zilpha, who's been around for the last 10 years, wouldn't Brace know this, the butler? Wouldn't he have understood that there's another woman?
Listen, Rod, your dad's on the road a lot, touring with bands and stuff like that. Do you know everything he's doing?
Surprisingly, yes, because he sends me pictures, and I'm like, what are you doing? Why? I don't want to see
so much.
So doesn't it? Listen, I don't know. I think it'd be too easy for her to be in cahoots with him. And it wouldn't make sense why they would set it up that people are worried, and he seemed worried about her, but you never know. Anyway, the next point in Marcus's email, he writes, I don't think Thoit agrees with the East India Trading Company. He's just doing what he has to do to survive. I get the feeling that Sir Stuart Strange and his East India Trading Company lackeys disgust him, and over time he will obviously be on Team Delaney. I want to like Thoit. I want him to be on Team Delaney. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Thoit clearly does not like the East India. The way he describes them to James, is that he doesn't want to be a part of it. He doesn't agree with it, but you don't have to support something to go along with it because of the fact that they control everything. And if you are a lawyer and you're in London and you want to have a practice and you want to be able to operate and make some money, you're going to have to interact with the EIC. It's also, a question of, it could be kind of both ways where he wants to support James, but at the same time, he could get himself clear of this, collect his fees, clear himself of the will, get clear of Utica, and just be done with it, But Thoit does. I mean, if you notice in the scene with the reading of the will and then afterward, Thoit and James are sitting on the same side of the room. He is literally the only person on James' side. And that, I think that visual cue is very powerful, where they seem like a team in a way.
I thought at first in episode 1 that Thoit was only looking out for himself because he wanted to get paid. He wanted to get that commission on the sale of Nootka Sound. But I feel like this was a situation where Thoit had firsthand experience with the East India Trading Company, what it did to his father and all the troubles. And he's like, listen, you just came back from wherever the fuck you've been. Sell this piece of land. Like, it killed your father. Like, I care about the Delaneys. I've been your lawyer for the last 40 years. Like, I don't want to see you go down the same path as your father and go crazy and mad and all that stuff. So at this point, I like the character of Thoit, and I do believe that he is on Team Delaney. The last point that Marcus makes in the email, he says, when James kills the assassin by biting him and then gets wounded, he goes into a flashback of Africa. My theory, all of the rumors about James, the cannibalism and the witchcraft, are going to come from those memories. I think he was wounded in Africa and nursed back to health by some African tribe and becomes one of them, think Avatar. The rumors will come from the brief glimpse that some sailors may get of James hanging out with the tribe. Lastly, please stop with the vampire theory. Pretty please with Thandie Newton on top. Keep it up. That comes from our boy, Coach Marcus. So we talked a little bit about this. We talked a little bit about the idea that there's a redemption or an Avatar story. Coach Marcus seems to believe at least that could be true. Your thoughts?
It could be, yeah. I mean, my initial thought was that it is a flashback to Africa and that something happened to him there, obviously, that, that changed his life. And I think from a lot of the trailers and previews we see, it seems that he has gone, literally tribal, with tattoos and everything else. It's quite possible that he picked up a thing or two that he's flashing back to. But it's also possible that he is, again, I'm sorry, Raj, I got to reference the OA here, that he might be accessing another plane, or that it's sort of a glimpse in the afterlife, that basically the African, concept of death is that you just basically go into the invisible world, right? That it's not the end of your existence. So when you die in most African cultures, the idea of the afterlife is that you just go to another realm that looks just like this one. So it could be that he's looking into, whether it's imagined or not, he's looking into the other realm, right? Or if you want to reference Stranger Things, it's like, the upside down.
Is that what it's called? The upside down?
The upside down. Yeah.
Is that where Barb still is?
Yeah,
she's still the upside down,
or as the OA would call it, off the board. However you want to say it. So in any event, in that case, it could be that sort of a situation. I agree with you, Marcus. As much as I love vampires, and as much as I said I would love it to be a vampire show, that would it would become my new favorite show, but it would not be the same show.
I would immediately protest, and you guys would have to get a third podcast host. Marcus, thank you so much for writing in. And that concludes all of our River Rants for this week. We do appreciate everyone who wrote in. Again, you can join the conversation. You can comment on all of these emails by visiting our website, clicking on the River Rants section, and there's a comment section there that you can respond back to each of these individual emails and see them in their long form. Is there any other announcements that we need to make before we shut down and get ready for Tuesday's deep dive episode? Nope. We do want to give a shout out to Big D, who could not make it. He's spending time with his family and also editing Commando, which we just recorded over at Shat the Movies. That should be dropping later tonight. That concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Taboo River Rants. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. That's how we grow this podcast. If you have a friend who likes Taboo, but you don't want to go through the effort of explaining to them everything that's going on, send them our way. We like to do that. We're everywhere on social media. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. You can also search for us on Facebook by searching for Shat on TV Podcasts. Again, that website is shatontv.com, and our email is hosts@shatontv. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by, be sure to leave a 5-star review. That really helps the podcast grow as well. Thank you, everyone who's written in a 5-star review thus far, where I think we're up to 13, so keep those numbers coming in. Also, you can check out our store on the website for cool Shat on TV merchandise that help keep the lights on. It helps keep the lights on.
Merchandise that helps keep the lights on.
Got it.
Misa helps to keep the lights on.
On behalf of my co-hosts, Gene Lyons and Big D, who couldn't join us, I'm Roger Roper. Be sure to join us on the next podcast for Taboo on Tuesday as we dive deeper into the Delaney East India Nootka Sound Trading Company mystery.